tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We were elected to bring a positive change to Vancouver and to the Downtown Eastside.
You can soon have your say on the Vancouver mayor's proposal to halt net new supportive housing in the city. He wants other communities to step up first. Plus,
I have no interest whatsoever in becoming American. Canada is the best country in the world.
I am more of the view that we have to find a deal from a diplomatic point of view.
different conservatives, different approaches to Donald Trump's tariff threats.
Nothing is more important than standing united.
Which way might Canada go? And
we're grooming the skate lane right now.
Low snow? How BC ski clubs are finding ways to keep the trails open.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threats against Canada has sparked a debate over whether this country or how this country ought to respond, whether in kind or offering an olive branch to its longtime ally. As Katie DeRosa reports, it's an issue that has divided conservative politicians across the country.
No, I say you can always become a state. And if you're a state, we won't have a deficit, we won't have to tariff you.
It's the latest salvo from U.S. President Donald Trump speaking to the World Economic Forum in Davos. Trump treating Canada less as an ally and more like a foe. Despite this, several conservative politicians in Canada say we ought to work with Trump, not fight him. Some even attending his inauguration in Washington, D.C. That includes BC Conservative Party President Aisha Esty, who posted a picture of herself to social media with the caption, "Make Canada Great Again." Party leader John Rustad says he didn't know Esty would be there.
Whether she's there or not is irrelevant. People can do what they want to do.
Esty could not be reached for comment. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says her trip to Washington, D.C. and earlier visit to Trump's Florida Golf Club were productive.
I can tell you the administration knows who Alberta is, and I am more of the view that we have to find a deal from a diplomatic point of view. And I don't know that this particular administration and this particular president responds well to threats.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford, on the other hand, a progressive conservative, argues Canada should push back with dollar-for-dollar tariffs of our own. BC's NDP Premier agrees.
You can surrender and give up, or you can stand up.
One analyst says we're watching a careful game of political calculus.
They are considering where their base is at when they're deciding how to approach Trump.
John Rustad has so far laughed off Trump's 51st state comments.
Yes, I have no interest whatsoever in becoming American. Canada is the best country in the world.
The silver lining of Trump's rhetoric, Rustad says, is there's now serious talk about making trade within Canada easier, a point most leaders agree on, regardless of political stripe. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
People will soon get a chance to weigh in on the Vancouver mayor's controversial proposal to put a freeze on net new supportive housing. Ken Sim wants other cities to step up to build supportive homes before more is built here. As Mira Baines reports, the public will get its turn next month.
A new plan to revitalize the Downtown Eastside would place a freeze on net new supportive housing in Vancouver until other cities start building it. Mayor Ken Sim made the bombshell announcement at a crime and safety forum. A city councillor with the ruling ABC party says Sim is planning to bring the motion forward at the next city council meeting early next month.
The motion will come to council for debate and decision, as well as public input at the end of February.
He says he's already heard positive feedback on the plan. A by-election for 2 council seats is set for April, but Meisner denies the plan is an effort to get votes.
It's not politically motivated. It's the right thing to do. We were elected to bring a positive change to Vancouver and to the Downtown Eastside.
The CEO of Atira, which provides housing to vulnerable women, says 5,000 people are on a wait list for supportive homes.
What we know is that women go back to abusive settings when there aren't options for housing or services. So we know that will continue, and it will be exacerbated by this.
In nearby Chinatown, the plan is welcome news for some. The head of the area's business association says local retailers and taxpayers are concerned about the concentration of social services nearby.
And it negatively impacts the community, and the zoning promotes it. You really have you create a ghetto.
BC's housing minister supports the call for other cities in Metro Vancouver to build supportive housing.
We've seen some positive movement in Richmond, in Surrey, and New West, but I think we need to do more. The Tri-Cities, we need a little bit more there. Burnaby needs to play a bigger role.
Still, he's concerned about elements of Vancouver's plan.
By saying that we're not going to have supportive housing, it means more people will be homeless, more people will be sleeping in parks, and that actually is a bigger detriment to community safety than actually having housing available for them.
Callon says the city does have the power to not approve future supportive projects, and so far, none are planned. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
A coroner's jury has now issued recommendations following the inquest into the starvation death of a BC woman. Florence Gerard, who was living with Down syndrome, was 54 years old when she died in the Port Coquitlam home of the woman who was supposed to be caring for her. The CBC's Karen Larson followed the inquest closely. We spoke with her earlier.
Well, Dan, the jury just came back in this case after deliberating for almost 2 full days, so I'm going to have to refer to my notes as I bring you up to date. Now, the jury did return a unanimous verdict that this death was by homicide and that the primary cause was starvation. This 5-person jury also made 13 recommendations, including better pay for frontline caregivers, unannounced visits to homes where vulnerable clients are being placed, and changes to give support to family members of a vulnerable individual who may want to care for that person in their home. That hasn't been previously available. And so what we heard from some of the testimony is that families are more or less compelled to put their loved one, who may be like Florence Gerard was, someone with Down syndrome, into government care, which was not a great situation in this case. We heard from Florence's sister, Sharon Bursey. She said she would have cared for Florence in her home with her husband and her 2 children, but that would have meant she had to quit her full-time job because there's no way she could afford to do it. But there was no supports coming or flowing down from the government through Community Living BC and through the agency that was responsible for Florence Gerard. That's Kinsight Community Living in the Tri-Cities area. And so Florence instead went into care, and we all know what her fate was now.
Now, the sister of Florence Gerard, Sharon Bursey, is reacting to the jury recommendations. She says she feels vindicated, but stressed the system has to change.
It's been a long 2 weeks. It's been a long almost 7 years. You know, I've always considered Florence murdered, and now they say homicide. So CLBC needs to make changes, the systemic.
Bursey says she's hoping to hear from the Premier that the government is going to make changes based on the jury's recommendations. Disability advocates say there are 13 recommendations, noting that means there is a lot of work to be done.
It says to me that, we have systemic failures, we have systemic indifference towards people with developmental and intellectual disabilities in this province. Kinsight failed. CLBC has failed, and the ministry has failed.
Astrid Dahl was a subcontractor for Kinsight Community Society, an agency under contract with Community Living BC. That's the Crown Corporation that pays for services for adults with developmental disabilities. Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada has announced plans to cut about a quarter of its workforce over the next 3 years. As Pinky Wong explains, it's prompting concerns over backlogs, especially among permanent resident applicants.
Doris Chang is frustrated over Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada's plan to cut roughly 3,300 employees over the next 3 years. Chang applied for her permanent residency in 2021 under Canada's Startup Visa program for immigrant entrepreneurs, and worries with less staff, processing time will only get longer.
Really disappointing, and don't know when this waiting will end.
She was initially told by IRCC it would take 12 months for her application to be processed. 39 months later, she's still waiting.
So it is very hard for us to live here, treat this as home, but without a permanent status. I'm just doing my business very, very hard, wholeheartedly, but seems that I just work for nothing.
The business owner says having to wait months on end for her permanent residency has been holding her back from expanding her business, having to use this shared kitchen space in the meantime. It is unclear who will be impacted by the cuts, but IRCC says it would reach every sector and branch. The Immigration Department said staffing is being adjusted to align with reduced immigration levels and funding changes. The Canada Employment and Immigration Union says the consequences are far-reaching.
Our members are the ones that are out there processing the permanent residency and citizenship applications. They're the ones that are bringing in the talent to strengthen our economy, and we're deeply concerned about the impact.
This immigration lawyer, who has been keeping a close eye on the situation, agrees. The staffing cuts on top of the current application backlog will cause more problems.
We'll have slower decision-making. Secondly, you will have bad decision-making because decisions are hurried and rushed when you have fewer people. So clients are actually extremely anxious. They don't know how to plan their lives, and this is going to result in more uncertainty.
An uncertainty that continues to impact Tang as she tries to build her life here in Canada. Pinky Wong, CBC News, Vancouver.
It is another low snow year for many Nordic ski clubs across BC, leaving it up to ski trail groomers to make the most out of the flakes that do fall. The CBC's Shelley Joyce shows us how they do it.
Good morning.
Hello there. How's the temperature this morning?
We're sitting at -12. The greens have been groomed. They were rolled for the skate lanes, but the classic lanes are in not bad shape.
It takes more than bitter cold and a lack of snow to keep some people off the cross-country ski trails.
We could use a bit more snow to cover up the debris from the last windstorm, but the skiing's actually pretty good.
A low snow season makes grooming trails like these near Lac Lejeune an exercise in technique and patience to coax the best out of what Mother Nature has to offer.
We're grooming the skate lane right now. The tiller in the back chews up the snow and regenerates the snow, but because the snow is so hard and compact, we need to go at a very slow speed.
Right now we're on the cusp of being able not to use our big machines. We still can, but they're very difficult to use right now in the low, hard packed snow. So we have been using our snowmobiles a lot more to groom our trails.
When the snow is really skimpy, too thin and hard packed for the big machines, the groomers pull out the snowmobiles and rake the surface to create texture.
We can't really predict what the future is going to bring for us, but the consensus is that we're probably going to deal with less snow in the future. So we've been putting a lot of work into our summer grooming to make sure our trails are as smooth as possible. Right now we can probably get operating with under 10 centimeters of snow.
Despite the absence of new snow, the Overlanders Ski Club has noticed an uptick in ski rentals and new members.
It's really exciting because our groomers are able to put out magical trails that are accessible for people who are new as well. And that magic moment of when someone who has gone skiing for the first time comes back into the rental shop, super stoked on the activity, and this is their new way to love winter, and they love this, is so rewarding.
These groomers are all volunteers. They spend hours each week, nights and early mornings mostly, creating a coveted surface that skiers call corduroy.
My favorite moment to see the kids on the snow is a lot of fun. On a bright sunny day like today, there's just nothing like it. For me personally, to be up in the morning and to watch the sunrise on some of the trails, and then look behind me and see the nice glistening carpet that we make for our skiers really feels good to me.
Shelley Joyce, CBC News, Lac Lejeune, BC.
And here is the person who will tell us whether going to get any more snow in Lac Lejeune and beyond, Darius Madabi, with our look at the weather.
Nope.
And? All right, then.
Yeah. At least not anytime soon. As we get into Monday, maybe we'll start to see a little bit of precipitation coming to the northwest, but BC is pretty much dry until at least mid next week. And you can see here no precipitation coming, very little cloud even. We're very clear across the board. If you take a look at our forecast right through the weekend, you'll notice maybe a little bit of cloud coming in at rare times, but that's pretty much it. If we take a look, zoom out to the rest of the province, you'll notice tonight maybe a little bit of cloud in a few places. But Dan, no precipitation in sight.
Okay, thanks, Darius. It looms large over Port Alberni. Coming up, we look at the past, present, and future of Mount Arrowsmith. Lunar New Year is less than a week away, and at Richmond's Aberdeen Mall, celebrations are already underway.
Happy New Year!
Because the celebration is about setting yourself up for a wonderful year, there are some things you can do to try to make that happen. It usually involves food and heading to the markets.
You normally go to the night market, and then you got the flowers, you got the stuff that you normally just don't buy while you're actually doing your normal life, because like, why am I spending the money to buy that little red thing? But that's why I took my dad here to actually experience the Lunar New Year.
At UBC, it was a picture-perfect day for organizers to get set up inside the botanical gardens. There will be self-guided tours of the Asian garden and more than 40 local makers and food trucks. Mount Arrowsmith is hard to miss when you drive into Port Alberni. The landmark has been around long before colonial settlements and features prominently in Indigenous oral histories. The CBC's Claire Palmer and Wamish Hamilton are on Vancouver Island, hearing stories from the Ho-Pachesset and Sechot nations about the mountain.
You'll look at the profile of Mount Arrowsmith and you'll see the face of a woman lying on her back. The ending of the story is she went down there for her final resting place, and she lay on her back and passed on, and so there she is till this day.
Port Alberni is home to the Sashot and Hupachsit First Nations. Both have a common name for Mount Arrowsmith, Cuthkachuth, but it's woven differently throughout their histories and lore.
As the oral history tells us, the Thunderbird was out on the Pacific Ocean hunting whales, and it had caught 2 whales, and it had 1 whale in each of its talons. Now, as the Thunderbird flew over the valley, it flew over Mount Arrowsmith, Cuthkachuth, on its way back to Tuta. Now, the Thunderbird dropped 1 of the whales there, and I am told that that carcass is still on Arrowsmith today.
Sarah says the mountain is also an important territory marker and the site of the watershed that feeds into the Somas River. And for the Sashot,
important flood mountains save our people from earthquakes or the great floods. So it's basically a protector.
the mountain is also prominent in contemporary and historical settler history. Here at the Port Alberni Museum, it's evident how the prominence of the mountain has woven itself through the art that comes from the small city.
The museum, we look at the history of the Alberni Valley and the Alberni-Clayoquot district, and it's a presence. You sort of suddenly realize that, hey, that 100-year-old photo is matching that scene today. There's something about that, the clouds that still react in that same manner.
Arrowsmith isn't just part of Port Alberni's distant past. It's also a key part of its future. As Port Alberni looks to become a name in adventure tourism, Mount Arrowsmith is just one alluring peak for hikers.
We really believe that we've got a big future in that area. We are really leaning into that space a lot.
While Mount Arrowsmith might mean many things, it means one very important thing to residents of the valley.
You know, approaching the hump and seeing Arrowsmith close up, coming into the valley, you know, it is a reminder that I'm home.
Wamish Hamilton, CBC News, Port Alberni.
A look back at the day that was on the White Rock Promenade with the pier and the rock, of course. A cold, crisp January day. A tiny bit warmer on the lower mainland, though, with highs about 6 degrees come the afternoon. So what does the weekend have in store for us? Darius has your province-wide weather forecast coming up.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
CBC returns as a media partner of the Push International Performing Arts Festival, January 23rd to February 9th. The festival features presentations of groundbreaking contemporary works of theater, dance, music, and multimedia. And bring in the Year of the Snake with CBC at the Vancouver Chinatown Spring Festival Parade on Sunday, February 2nd. Join us along the parade route and celebrate the Lunar New Year.
A recent CBC News story exposed the problem of big grocers overcharging customers by misweighing meat. As Sophia Harris tells us, some people want the grocers to be held accountable.
Okay, gonna weigh the chicken.
A recent CBC News investigation uncovered Loblaw, Sobeys, and Walmart stores selling underweighted meat.
Okay.
Based on a tip from a shopper, CBC found more at this Sobeys-owned store. We bought 3 packs of ground beef. They appear to have been weighed with the packaging, which violates federal regulations. Calculated overcharge, 6%. In an email, Sobeys thanked CBC for bringing this to the grocer's attention and said it has reinforced its procedures and policies related to meat weighing.
They're not paying more attention to this stuff. This is their business.
Another shopper, Iris Griffin, complained to the CFIA about underweighted beef back in 2023. Bought at this Loblaw-owned store. Turns out the error occurred at 80 stores. Griffin's unhappy the CFIA issued no penalties in that case, which is typical. So you have a copy of the proposed class action there? But Griffin is happy about a new proposed class action lawsuit. It alleges Loblaw, Sobeys, and Walmart misrepresented the weight of meat products and overcharged shoppers.
It gives people a sense that something is being done and that the retailer is being held accountable for the money that they've taken from consumers.
Sobeys and Loblaw didn't comment on the lawsuit. Walmart said a third party sold underweighted meat at this one store for 2 weeks this past December. But a customer at that store complained about the problem on social media back in October, 2 months earlier. Walmart says it's investigating.
It's the government's responsibility to verify compliance.
This consumer advocate says the CFIA needs to penalize grocers which break the rules.
It's beyond me that they don't take more enforcement, and heavier enforcement also sends a message.
How much would it cost them?
The federal NDP has sent a message to Canada's Competition Bureau, asking it to hold these giant corporations accountable. The CFIA says it issues fines when appropriate. And following CBC's investigation, the agency launched a new website about how to report and spot misweighed food. Sophia Harris, CBC News, Vancouver.
There's a growing online backlash over Amazon's sudden decision to close all 7 of its facilities in Quebec. The hashtag boycott Amazon is popping up on social media. But is the movement likely to gain any traction? Eowyn Reynolds reports.
Amazon's announcement that it's closing its facilities in Quebec has reignited a conversation online about boycotting the company. Some people are saying they plan to cancel their Prime or Amazon accounts. Others say they even plan to return their recent purchases. So if these people are serious, that means they could be turning to other online options or even buying in physical stores. But is that actually going to happen? Let's see what people have to say about that.
I think it'd be a good idea, but I don't think it's going to happen.
I personally already don't use Amazon that often. I prefer to support local businesses.
I'm a convenience kind of guy, but places I like to go to and I have a relationship with, I'll definitely go back to them.
This consumer behavior expert says company boycotts in Canada have gained momentum in the past. He points to the closure of the Kraft Heinz ketchup factory in Leamington, Ontario in 2014, which prompted a boycott movement against the product. He says the challenge with Amazon is that the competition doesn't quite measure up.
For Amazon, you don't have that many retailers that provide the same convenience, the same fast delivery, the same variety of products. This is one big inhibitor.
Still, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business hopes the Amazon closures build momentum around buying local.
We build a stronger economy if we are helping our small businesses. 60 cents are staying in the economy when you shop local, 8 cents with the online giants.
But will that be enough to convince people to opt for local over convenience? Experts aren't very optimistic, but they do say that a lot rides on whether or not Amazon will be able to provide the same quality of service in Quebec after the closures. Will people get their packages on time? Will the same amount of stock be available? And the company has said, yes, it will. And experts say that will ultimately be the decider for whether people click confirm order or sign out.
Eowyn Reynolds reporting from Montreal. The threats from Donald Trump continue to come day after day. He says tariffs are on their way and they could be massive. So what would be the impact and how would it play out? Andrew Chang breaks down the impact of massive tariffs and the complicated endgame everyone is facing.
One of Donald Trump's most consistent threats, before and since becoming president, has been that he will place steep tariffs, taxes, on incoming Canadian goods to the U.S.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada because they're allowing vast numbers of people. Canada's a very bad abuser also. Vast numbers of people to come in and fentanyl to come in.
So if you're American, this might make your life more expensive. Your food, your medicine, your cars, your oil, your lumber, your concrete, it all goes up. And Canada's position so far has been largely to threaten the U.S. back.
Canada will respond, and everything is on the table.
They won't be tariffed without impact. They cannot be tariffed without consequences.
We need to target where it's going to impact Americans the most.
Just about everybody's gearing up for a fight. So what does that trade war look like? And when does it actually begin? Let's start by underscoring really the most immediate problem with all of this.
Probably February 1st is the date we're looking at. We're talking about approximately 25%.
Probably February 1st, approximately 25%, without really any more detail than that. These are threats, not policy.
Until we get certainty as to the amount of the tariffs, the form that they take, and the duration, everything is hypothetical.
But let's say we take Trump's words at face value, and he orders a 25% across-the-board tariff on all goods coming in from Canada and Mexico. What does that do to the American economy? Well, one study by a Washington think tank suggests two things would happen. Inflation would go up, and GDP would go down. Let's tackle those one at a time. Why would inflation go up? Well, contrary to what Trump believes, or says he believes,
We will tariff and tax foreign countries to enrich our citizens.
when you put a tax on foreign goods, it's not those countries who pay the tax. And here's why. Let's say I have a booming American business in mystery boxes. What's in these boxes? Who knows? Doesn't matter. Maybe it's a Mexican avocado, or it could be a Canadian LX877 Feller Buncher. You don't know. But for me to sell these mystery boxes to Americans, I have to import them first. And if my cost is $100 a box, a 25% tariff means my business has to pay a 25% tax on every box.
The fee is generally paid by the importer. The importer has to pay the fee to the U.S. government.
So it's not Canada, it's not Mexico, it's not the exporter that pays. It's the American company buying that product to sell to the American people that pays. Now, here I have a choice. My business can eat that extra cost, and many companies do this so that their customers don't stop buying their product. And they might especially do this if they don't think the tariffs will stay for long, like it's just short-term pain. But my other option as a business is to pass my higher costs onto you, the customer.
It will mostly be U.S. consumers or U.S. purchasers of intermediary goods from Canada who will pay the tariffs.
And that can amount to more than just a 25% hike in price. Because if my mystery boxes cost me $125 to import instead of $100, remember, I don't sell you the boxes at cost. I have to make a profit. And if my regular markup is 40%, I might now charge my customers $175 per box instead of my normal price of $140. That's a more than 25% increase. We saw a really interesting example of this inflationary pressure at work in 2018 when Trump put a tariff on washing machines. American researchers did a whole study about this because not only did the cost of imported washing machines go up, LG and Samsung are South Korean, but even American washing machines somehow became more expensive.
You see your competitors putting up their prices because of tariffs, and you are not importing. When they have an opportunity to make money, well, that's what you do.
And here's the kicker. This study also found that the price of dryers, their price went up by a similar magnitude. It didn't matter if you were foreign or domestic. Dryer prices across the board went up by a very noticeable amount in a very small amount of time. Dryers weren't even part of the Trump tariffs in 2018. But because people tend to buy washers and dryers in pairs, businesses charged more money for them too. So that's the inflation side of things. What about the drop in GDP?
It will reduce the amount of income in consumers' pockets to go spend on restaurants, cars, home renovations, etc.
The logic here is pretty straightforward. When prices go up, consumers have less spending power. More of their money is going to pay this 25% tariff to the government. And that means businesses are taking in less money. Consumer spending accounted for almost 70% of US GDP last year. It is the driver of the American economy. And speaking of drivers, the auto industry is a really good example of how damaging tariffs can be for those who have to pay them. Because cars aren't just built in one country. The engine might be built in one place, the transmission in another. Then they're assembled in yet another place. And all of these components can cross national borders multiple times before they magically turn into a car. A tariff charges a tax every time they do.
You say that the average car crosses the border 7 or 8 times, 8, 9 times over the course of its production. Trying to unwind that in a way that doesn't hurt American consumers is an incredibly difficult task. I spoke to one trade analyst in the United States who said, tinkering even a little bit with the fundamentals of that trade organization is like doing surgery without anesthesia.
And consider how some parts manufacturers have plants on both sides of the Canada-US border, and many ship parts between locations constantly. A company like that would have to completely rethink its supply chain, or else face 25% higher costs, sometimes multiple times for the same product.
If you're a manufacturer that is responsible for that supply chain, would you not just move your supply chain entirely into the US and forget the idea of having to deal with tariffs entirely?
And there's the key to understanding Trump's position. Another stated goal of these tariffs is to turn American purchases into American jobs by actually making the things that people usually buy.
America will be a manufacturing nation once again. We will bring prices down.
It's also worth mentioning, tariffs do bring money in to the US Treasury. The estimates I've seen from what Trump has proposed are in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year. That's money that can fund the military, border control, tax cuts, whatever Republicans want. But long before any of that happens, countries like Canada suffer greatly. Let's go back to that chart showing the drop in American GDP. For whatever hit their economy takes, the Canadian and Mexican economies are projected to get hit 5-10 times as hard. Because a country like Canada relies much more on the US than the US relies on Canada.
78% of our exports go to the United States. So if those exports are suddenly 25% more expensive, then Americans aren't going to buy them. Or they may buy what they need, but they're going to buy significantly less.
So there are some estimates that believe Canada will fare even worse than the scenario I just showed you, that even a more modest 10% tariff would cause Canadian GDP to fall more than 2 percentage points, which maybe doesn't sound like a lot, but on $2 trillion of GDP, 2% is $40 billion. That's more than what Canada has typically spent annually on its entire national defense budget. Up the tariff to 25%, and the damage gets even worse.
Weaponized uncertainty instills fear into foreign investors, and it also instills fear into Canadian companies that maybe I need to move that plant expansion to the other side of the border.
And let's consider the auto industry once again. Vehicles are Canada's second largest export by value at $51 billion annually. The overwhelming majority of that, 93% of all those cars and trucks, go to the United States.
So the US and Canada have an average tariff rate now of less than 5%. Quintupling that is just unimaginable. Canada is in a real bind if it can no longer trade effectively with the United States.
So let's try to understand what the Canadian strategy might be if Trump's opening move is a 25% across-the-board tariff. And we can look back to the last time this trade war happened for guidance.
The first type of tariffs that a government would tend to impose would be against iconic U.S. products, things like bourbon, whiskey. So yeah, that would hit Kentucky hard, but Canada can replace the bourbon with Canadian rye whiskey. No big problem there. And so they'll go after those iconic products, Georgia peaches, Florida oranges, etc. But as those tariffs escalate, if a trade war escalates, you have to put more on the table.
And this is where we really start entering into wildly speculative, uncharted waters. Because while cars are Canada's #2 export to the United States, you know what the #1 export is? Oil. The U.S. produces more crude oil than any other country in the world, around 13 million barrels a day. But for its own citizens, it needs more than that, about 20 million barrels a day. Canada produces exactly the kind of heavy crude that American refineries are set up to process, to turn into actually useful things like gas, diesel, jet fuel. So the U.S. buys the majority, around 60% of the additional crude oil it needs from Canada. Sourcing this oil from Iraq, Iran, Venezuela, that is politically, economically, and logistically far more difficult. A 25% tariff would hurt Americans. But if Canada retaliates hard and takes the so-called nuclear option, slapping down its own export tariffs on Canadian oil or banning its export to the United States entirely,
The Americans have a cushion. If we have to cut oil, what do we do with the oil? You've taken 90% of Alberta's exports go to the US. So again, you're going to wreck the Alberta economy. You're going to impose all those costs within Alberta. And for what?
Bottom line, trade wars are messy and also hard to forecast because all of this is just the beginning.
You know the story about killing chickens to scare monkeys? A farmer will take a chicken into the courtyard and kill it so the monkeys watch and get the idea. We're kind of the chicken in that scenario.
Donald Trump's stated ambition is to fundamentally reshape the U.S. trade relationship, not just with Canada, but with the entire world. In his words, the U.S. is being ripped off by everybody. So, as president, he's looking to change that, perhaps at any cost.
A severe windstorm has been battering Ireland, Northern Ireland, and parts of Scotland and Wales. Dangerous record-high winds have knocked out power for nearly a third of homes and businesses. More on Storm Eowyn after this. Ireland has been battered by Storm Eowyn. It had its beginnings in North America before it made its way across the Atlantic. Johanna Wagstaff breaks down why this winter storm has meteorologists so surprised.
This same storm that brought once-in-a-lifetime snow to the Gulf Coast brought generational hurricane-force winds to the UK. Here's why this storm was so shocking and why we might start seeing these once-in-a-lifetime storms more than once in our lifetime. The UK can get intense winter storms, and often they do form from a lingering system that's crossed North America and ended up over the Atlantic Ocean. In this case, that storm formed from Arctic air that dove down to the Gulf of Mexico thanks to a huge wave in the jet stream. So it already had a lot of energy from these big contrasts in temperatures. But here's where things took a different turn. Once it hit the Atlantic waters, it began to blow up. One of the most intense storms on record for the UK, and one that even scientists were surprised to see. In fact, its central pressure, that's how we measure how strong a storm is, blew the definition of a weather bomb out of the water, double the rate required for explosive cyclogenesis. It's a pressure generally seen in a Category 4 hurricane, not a winter storm. And right on cue, the hurricane hunters from the National Hurricane Center were so interested in how quickly this grew, they flew across the Atlantic and into the storm to help us better understand these systems. Okay, so why so intense? Well, first of all, the jet stream that's carrying this storm across the ocean is so fast, 300 kilometers per hour fast, almost double average speeds. And like a hurricane, it had a very warm core, helping to fuel it up on that ocean crossing. When the storm hit the coast Friday morning, it was at its strongest. That's why 4.5 million people got a very rare danger to life alert on their phones before landfall, and why the island has experienced some of the strongest winds on record. So are we going to start seeing these once-in-a-lifetime storms more often? Here's what we know. According to a recent attribution study, winter and autumn storms are dropping about 20% more rainfall in the UK and Ireland due to climate change. What we don't know is the influence of climate change on windstorms. It's a little more complicated because climate change is affecting that jet stream in many different ways. And this storm needed all the right ingredients to come together.
It's a doozy. Darius Madabi here with our look at the weather overseas. Go over the pond again to Ireland and the UK. What's happening now with Eowyn?
Well, it's a doozy is another succinct way to put it. Yeah, I mean, Joe covered most of it, but I just wanted to mention that Ireland did see the strongest wind gust ever recorded in the country, and they have records going quite far back, 183 kilometers per hour. That's just whopping. And also, Johanna mentioned the fact that this storm doubled the criteria necessary to be considered a weather bomb. The criteria is 24 millibar drop in pressure in under 24 hours. This storm dropped 34 millibars in under 5 hours. That is just an incredible rate of development, and generally the faster that storm develops, the stronger those winds are going to be, and that's really exactly what we saw. Now, they're not out of the woods yet. Those winds have calmed down, but there are a couple more storm systems on the way. These ones not packing as strong winds, but lots of rain and snow and ice possibly on the way for some of these areas. So definitely a place to be watching this weekend and into early next week. One other place I want to mention that's not here is down in LA, because that rain is looking like it is certain to come now. That is good news. Still 5 to 15 millimeters, maybe some areas getting up to 20 millimeters of rain, a little bit more consistent, a little more spread out through the day. Sunday is looking like a good day for LA as well. So now let's turn our attention back here to BC, where there's nothing quite so exciting, but lots of sunshine on the way, which I'm sure many people are happy to hear. There's a little bit of cloud that may pop in and out at times, especially in parts of the interior. But for the most part, we're looking at nothing but sunshine. The south coast, other than maybe the North Island, really is only sunny over the next few days. And it's not until mid next week that we maybe start to see a bit of a change. Maybe some precipitation feeds into the northwest starting on Monday. But other than that, those temperatures aren't fluctuating too much. As you'll notice on Sunday, here we go. Fort Nelson is going to be warmer than Vancouver by a considerable margin, which is unusual. Those temperatures will start to return back towards normal as we get into mid next week, the same time that we start to maybe get a little bit warmer and wetter here on the coast. Lots of sunshine on the way for tomorrow, and watch out for some wind chill in the mornings. It'll feel a little bit cooler than we're seeing as our lows here in the mornings, maybe closer to -5 tomorrow morning. But other than that, lots of sunshine. I've bumped my cloud back a day, but this might be when we start to see our pattern shift, temperatures come up, and maybe some rain towards the end of next week.
Okay, Darius, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yep, it's out of the bag. It really isn't easy being green. The big trials of a tiny frog. Up next. A Montreal man was recently faced with a question of life or death when he discovered a hitchhiker in his shopping bag.
A small frog managed to hitch a ride all the way from California to his Montreal pad. The CBC's Rowan Kennedy explains what happened next.
What would you do if you found this ferocious beast in your fresh produce? This guy's name is Tony Soprano, and he's been adopted by a Montrealer after being found in a celery bag from California.
At first I was a little bit shocked. Normally I would have been like, oh, I would just like flush her down the toilet or throw her in the garbage, but I was thinking maybe this is like a good opportunity to save something or do something good. I just assumed she was a she. Apparently, it's a male because it does those little mating calls from time to time.
Deslongchamps bought a small aquarium for the amphibian, and he says its health has improved by leaps and bounds over 3 weeks. According to a biologist, Tony is likely a male Pacific tree frog native to the West Coast.
Are you surprised in the first place that this
frog survived?
I'm not that surprised because there's basically a microclimate that creates around, the roots and stuff like that. So, and it's not the first time that we've seen this type of situation.
The way the insects make it in is during the harvesting process. These fresh produce items would undergo rinsing and cleaning, but that isn't always enough.
At first, Deslongchamps thought about releasing Tony into the wild, but then learned it would be a cold death sentence. Experts recommend reporting something like this to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and not eating any contaminated food.
The main concern is basically causing unwanted animal migrations. This animal can also introduce some disease to our indigenous animals.
Little cricket, very small. It doesn't require that much attention to it. Just needs to be, in a relatively humid environment with like a UVB light in good temperature.
Deslongchamps plans to keep the frog as a pet through winter, sheltered from the cold and a long hop from home.
Don't flush it. They can breathe underwater. No, you know.
It's going to come back and get you. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6.
We'll have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Good night.